And again, welcome to our anniversary. Hi, gang. Welcome to the anniversary. Yes. Hello? Can we hear each other? Okay. Welcome again to the anniversary. My name is Kevin Johnson, a very grateful alcoholic. Are there any other alcoholics in the hall? Yay! All right. Let's have a good evening. Before I move 1 second further, these things don't happen by any one person. There's been a lot of effort put into this tonight, and I'd like to thank some people. I'd like to thank the people for decoration, which was Penny Witt, Marie King, Brenda Marina, Al North, Jerry Edelman. I'd like to thank the people with the food, which was Ben Rogers, and he was helped by Lonnie and Bob and Margie and Jim and Chris and Mark. I'd like now, if you would, I'd like the officers of the club of the Serenity Club to please stand up and come forward. The officers of the club, please. Who all is here? Ray, please. And the directors of the club, please, come on up. Arthur, Alice, Phil. Come on up. We're very pleased that you've all come out tonight to share with us in our 14th anniversary. Again, the motto of the club is keep going a day at a time and further everyone's sobriety. And right now, it's my pleasure to introduce the president of the club, Ray Smith. There goes your anonymity, Ray.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ray Smith, and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. I couldn't be more grateful to see such a good crowd here tonight. And before I forget, I want to thank Sandy V for being here, coming to speak for us. I want to thank Kevin for chairing this and having such a wonderful turnout and having such a I think it was a lot of volunteers, but I don't know how he got those good committees with the decorating and all that and the food. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here tonight and to be sober. And hope you all enjoy it and have a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. That's it, Brian. You want to sit down, right? Thank you. We're about to start our AA meeting. And to do that, I'd like to ask some people to come up that are going to help me open the meeting of the AA meeting. Would the group come up, please? And your big books? You got the big books? All right. All set? Let's have an AA meeting, please. May we open this meeting with a moment's silence. We'll follow that with a Serenity prayer. Use the silence as you see fit. Thank you. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. My name is Kevin Johnson. I'm a very grateful alcoholic. First, we're going to start with our preamble, and Jerry's going to read that for us. Please, Jerry.
Hi, I'm Jerry, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, I'm Jerry.
Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you very much. Right across the alleyway and downstairs, we have our Big Book meeting every Wednesday night at 7:30. We decide to open this meeting with some readings from the Big Book, and we're going to start with Dwight.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dwight George, and I am a grateful recovering alcoholic.
Hi, Dwight.
This is the foreword to the first edition. This is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brenda, and I am an alcoholic and drug addict. Chapter 2, page 17. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economical, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who are who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship of friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the strangers of great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyfulness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy is escape from the disaster, does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is the one element in the powerful cement which blinds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact is for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out of which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism.
My name is Dorothy. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic.
Hi, Dorothy.
Chapter 2, page 24 of Alcoholics Anonymous. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink.
Good evening. My name is Jim, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jim.
This is from Chapter 3 of Alcoholics Anonymous. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he would control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step to recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were gaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by a still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better.
My name is Brenda, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Brenda.
Reading from chapter 4, page 44 and 45. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Kevin, I can't read it. Could you finish it for me?
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right, Frank.
I'm Frank Mazuka, an alcoholic.
Hello, Frank.
Chapter 5, page 62. Whatever our protestations are not most of us concerned with ourselves and our resentments or self-pities, selfishness and self-centeredness that we think is the root of our trouble. Driven by hundreds of forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows, our relatives, and our reliance. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it will kill us. God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Thanks.
My name is Marie. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Marie.
Chapter 5, page 66. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholics whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again, and with us, to drink is to die. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be dubious luxuries of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison.
I'm Penny. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Penny.
Chapter 6, page 84 and 85. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as a hot flame. We react sanely and normally. We will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. This is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. It is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured from alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition.
Hi, everyone. My name is Al North, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Al.
This is Chapter 7, page 103. We're careful never to show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. Experience shows that such an attitude is not helpful to anyone. Every new alcoholic looks for this spirit among us and is immensely relieved when he finds that we are not witch burners. A spirit of intolerance might repel alcoholics whose lives could have been saved had it not been for such stupidity. We would not even do the cause of temperate drinking any good. For not one drinker in 1,000 likes to be told anything about alcohol by one who hates it. Someday we hope that Alcoholics Anonymous will help the public to a better realization of the gravity of the alcoholic problem. But we shall be of little use if our attitude is one of bitterness or hostility. Drinkers will not stand for it. After all, our problems are of our own making. Bottles were only a symbol. Besides, we have ceased fighting anybody or anything. We have to.
Thank you all very much. Just wonderful. The wisdom of the big book. It's such a God-given thing has been left to us by Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And now we come to a part of the program I'm looking forward to very much, and that's to introduce our speaker. When I first came down to this area from New York City, to be exact, I was 9 months sober. And I knew for sure that if you didn't speak on Thursday night at the Lenox Hill Group in New York, you weren't a speaker. You know, that was it. If you didn't speak up there, you didn't have a right to speak. Until I went to Foxhall one night, and I heard Sandy. All right, well, he's not too shabby, you know. he could make Foxhall. I mean, he could make Lenox Hill. And it was wonderful. I remember, I think that night, Sandy, you did Drop the Rock, which I know you hear a lot about. And then I go on to know Sandy, and I happened to be out in Las Vegas a few years later, and there was a roundup that Saturday night, so I stayed on, and sure enough, Sandy was the key speaker. And that afternoon, he was out jogging and sprained an ankle or something. Is that right? And I put a bar stool up there for him to do his talk that night. I thought that worked out pretty well. And then, of course, one of the highlights for a lot of us was the key speaker on Friday night at the New Orleans International Convention. And that was wonderful, too. So, Sandy, I've heard so many people talk about you. You know, there's a man in New York, he said, do you know Sandy Beach? You know, it's just wonderful. And I'm very pleased and very grateful. Now, you all heard me, as far as my sponsor's concerned, I'm very grateful that Sandy's here tonight. Please, Sandy, come up.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Sandy Beach, and I'm an alcoholic. How you doing? Congratulations on your 15th anniversary, and I'm delighted to be part of it. And I'm so glad that Kevin called me up. I was getting ready to get in my car and drive down Route 1 to the club. And I'm afraid I would have been a little bit late. Even though the ticket plainly says where the event is, I had not registered in my head. Although my sponsor early on said, read the fine print. It wasn't exactly what he said, but in any event, I'm going to talk a little bit about my story, and then I heard everybody reading out of the big book, and I think I'd like to talk a little bit about that, if that's all right. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous on Pearl Harbor Day in 1964 out in Manassas, Virginia, at a group anniversary similar to this. I didn't want to be there. I was looking for some way to get out of a situation I was in. My problem was I had been confined in a nut ward for about 4 months, and something about drinking. The Marine Corps thought I had a problem. I had had a seizure and went into the DTs, and they had me locked up in there. And I was home over a weekend. They had made me an outpatient after 4 months, and I started drinking. It was just going to be for to watch the football game. I had a rule that you had to have a beer when you were watching a Redskin game. You know how you make rules for yourself? And they told me if I ever drank again, my Marine Corps career would be over. So I was sitting there with this dilemma. I had a rule that said you have to drink beer when you're watching a Redskin game, and the Marine Corps was saying if you drink again, we're going to throw you out. So what was I going to do, sit there with the set off? You know what I mean? You're just caught with your old ideas, with your convictions, or whatever you call them, the principles that you live by. So I drank a beer, and I remember that nothing happened. I remember thinking about that. Drank the beer. Here I had been locked up all this time. I had had malnutrition, convulsions, DTs, and all that. They said the first drink gets you drunk. I drank the beer, watched the game, didn't have any problem, went to bed, slept better than I had slept in years. And I got up the next day, and I had to go back to the nut ward up in Bethesda Naval Hospital. And all the way up in the car, I remember thinking about the beer that I had had last night and how it did nothing. You know what I'm talking about? It did nothing. And so I was trying to factor all of that into my drinking history, where I had had all these problems from drinking and alcoholism and the first drink getting you drunk and so on down. And I got back up there, and they were having all the various group therapy and play class and the various things they do in the nut ward, and all I could think about was the beer. How I had had that beer, and that was all, and nothing happened. And I wanted to talk to somebody about it, but I was worried that if I did share with even the other patients that were in there, the word would get back to these people. So I kept it a secret. And I just thought about this, and I'm going to tell you, it was one of these things where no matter what anybody was saying, you know how they're having a conversation and you're not there? Because I was up here going, isn't that amazing? I mean, this is just incredible what just happened yesterday. I had that beer, and I started getting the sense of being free of alcohol. You know what I'm talking about? That beer had set me free from all those years of alcoholic drinking. And I started thinking about this, and it lasted about 4 days. I couldn't sleep at all. I mean, I would lie in that bed, and I'd dream of this new freedom from alcohol. All I could see was that beer. And there was me and that beer and that freedom from alcohol. And I couldn't eat breakfast, couldn't eat lunch. I was just too excited. I mean, when you are set free from a problem, you just have this great elation that there you are, totally free at last from alcohol. Me and that beer, and free. And if you're new and you're looking for an example of an obsession where all you think about is one thing, that was it. All I could think about was that beer and being free of alcohol. Which you look at those two sentences, they're kind of unusual. All you're thinking about is beer and being free of alcohol. It just don't seem to go too well together, but there I was. And I remember how happy I was about all this. And I decided on Thursday that when I came home for my next weekend out of that place, that maybe watching the Redskin game the following weekend, I would have one drink of vodka, which was my preferred drink over beer. And so on the way home Friday, I got a year's supply. I figured, hell, which would be roughly a quart right? If you're only going to drink one drink a week, which was my new thing now that you're totally free from alcohol. Well, you know the story. I decided not to wait for the Redskin game, which was Sunday, but rather, why not try this new freedom out a little early? Just have a drink of vodka and then just sort of enjoy the whole weekend having had that and just walk around going, God, I only had one drink. Isn't it wonderful? So I had that drink and it was wonderful, and I walked around going, isn't it great to just have one drink? I remember that feeling. I just love it. It's so great, I ought to do it again. I could have one drink again and walk around going, look at that, I just had one drink again. I did it. And I'm sort of mastering drinking. And so that bottle went that weekend, and I found myself totally back in the spot I was in. I had to drink maintenance drinking just from one weekend of drinking, which meant I had to bring booze into the nut ward and keep it out in my car and sneak out there and get a drink and all of this stuff. And that's how I ended up going to Manassas, because the following weekend when I was home, I knew that they were about to catch me up in the nut ward. When I was going to come back on Monday, I just knew, you know how paranoia sets in? And near the end of that week, it looked like the corpsmen, the doctors were all having little huddles. You know when people are talking about you, you can see them over there, and they're, damn. I don't see those people doing that. I see them talking in different corners, but they're never talking about me anymore. But boy, they used to. You could just tell they were talking about you over in that corner. So I knew they were getting close, and they were probably saying, when he comes back Monday, we're going to get him. So my answer to that was to join AA over the weekend. Then I would come in Monday, and they would say, we're going to throw you out of the Marine Corps for drinking, and I'm going to say, I joined AA over the weekend, and everything is fine. So I dialed Intergroup up, and I was down in Quantico. Phone call came up here to Clarendon, where the Northern Virginia Intergroup was, and they had some one Marine phone number down in Quantico, Bill T., who's still my sponsor, and he got the phone call and came over to my house, and it was around noon on a Saturday, and he came in to talk about all the various things, and I could tell the second I met him that there was serious trouble. He just sort of filled the doorway, had a shaved head and a bull neck, and just like this, and he just went, my name is Bill, this is a 12-step call. I talk, you listen. And I went, and then he went into the family and got them, listen, this is the deal, this kid's been there, and God, it just, I went back in. Every so often I'd come back into the room where everybody was discussing me, and I'd go, couldn't you leave some literature and I'll look at it? And because I could tell he was a fanatic. He had talked about where he went on Monday nights, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. You know what I mean? He had a meeting list, and I'm thinking to myself, he never takes a break. It's Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. And he had been sober a year and a half, and I'm going, God, a year and a half, and he's not well yet? I mean, this guy is really got problems. And so he started talking about 7:30 about going to the meeting in Manassas. And I was going, well, all these things. And he finally just said, look, you get in the car. And that became sort of the bottom line, but the conversation between he and I over the next month or so was there'd be all this BS back and forth, and then he'd go, okay, that's enough, get in the car. And then it was like that was AA's first step, get in the car. And we go to there, and he just sat me down in the front row, incurable row. And it was, in the Odd Fellows Hall in Manassas. That building is probably gone by now. And it was a group anniversary, and they had, I remember Pete, Ann, and Speedy, and those guys were celebrating the anniversary. I guess Pete probably had 5 years then. And afterwards, they had square dancing. They had all this food, the buffet, and then they got this gang out, and they all played fiddles and violins, and it was really, wonderful, except for one thing. At that point in the evening, I had about 8 hours of sobriety. And when you're about 8 hours without a drink, square dancing, buffets, and happy people, I mean, when you're feeling like that, the last thing you want to come up is people going, "Isn't sobriety wonderful?" And you're going, you want to just go outside and dry heat for a while. And I went out a couple times, and it was December, and it was freezing rain out there, and there was no place to run to. I couldn't see a light in any direction. I kept coming back in the building, looking at my watch. How long are we going to be here? We're there till 12:30. We got there at 7 or something like that, and we stayed till 12:30. I'm coming home in the car, and he's talking about we're going every night. And I have no way of knowing that all meetings aren't like that. Jesus. It's 6.5 hours every night with happy people who just go, "Isn't sobriety wonderful?" Like, Christ, they were probably all born rich. Couldn't understand what the hell they were so happy about, Some of them were ugly. Some of them were old. Some of them didn't have jobs, and they're walking around. Boy, am I happy. And I could not understand what people were on in here. You know what I mean? It's, well, they're on something. I don't know what it is. Well, the years have gone by. That guy is still my sponsor. A lot of things have happened, which is what sobriety is all about. And basically, my early sobriety consisted of, I think it was primarily based on fear of sponsor. There was just that, if you drink, he'll find out, and that will be bad news. So until you get rid of him, do not drink. It would be bodily more harmful than shaking and hurting and all of this. So I just hung in there and shook and so on down. So that's sort of where I, got in there. I don't need to go through the entire drinking story. That sort of captured the essence of my drinking, which was a survival thing. Alcohol was an answer. It was not a problem. It was an answer to a problem. Alcohol solved the basic problem of growing up and becoming a human being, which is sort of a painful process. It involves a lot of change from being a self-centered child to a semi-responsible adult, and every human being has to go through that experience, except for alcoholics. We don't have to go through that. We just drink and avoid all of that. And that's what I did. It was you became an instant grown-up when you drank. You intuitively knew how to handle situations that used to baffle you. And the third drink that came down, you knew how to dance. You knew how to calm down. You knew how to sleep. If you're tired, you wanted energy, you drank. If you were too hyped out, you drank until you passed out. If you were nervous, you drank till you got calm. If you were too calm and you wanted to get hyped up, you drank more and you got hyped up. So what we had in the drinking world, at least what I had in the drinking world, was one answer. No matter what the problem was, I had one answer. You may say that's stupid. How could you go through life, no matter what the problem is, and only have one answer? Well, that's what I had. If somebody was wanted me to make a decision about something, well, we really need your decision. And I'd look at it and I'd go, just a minute. Go out in the kitchen, get a drink, and wait for the answer to come. And so no matter what was bothering me, I always turned to alcohol first. And so that's where I was coming from. No matter what the problem was, there was just one answer. You know the next place I found where that's what the ground rules were? Alcoholics Anonymous. No matter what the problem is, we got one answer. And I think we can sum it up as grow spiritually. And if you have a sponsor like mine, that's what they tell you. Did you ever hear Clancy speak? Clancy's one of my favorite speakers, and he has this story about Clancy from the West Coast. He has this, pigeons call him up at 3 a.m. with all these problems. And Clancy has what he calls the aha machine. Which means you just put the phone here while the problems are going. And then she said to me, I'm going to leave you, and I don't know whether to blow my brains out or die. And you just go about your business reading a book, and every 10 minutes or so you go, uh-huh. And then when they get all through with whatever the problem might have been, you tell them, don't drink, don't commit suicide, go to a meeting tomorrow night, say a prayer, I'll see you there. And if you've been around a while, you'll notice that no matter what the problem is, you get the same answer. Well, that'll be all right. Go to a meeting. Don't drink. Hang in there. And you're going, Christ, don't you ever hear my problem? Say the Serenity prayer. Say the Serenity prayer. Oh, you just lost your job? Well, sponsor some people. Got a lot of time on your hands. But you never get somebody saying, well, go over there and feel sorry for yourself and really get into that. It's just, that's all right, that's all right. There isn't anything that is serious enough to drink over. And we find that we have a slogan, first things first, and I think that that's what it means, is to eventually learn how to put the spiritual solution first and rely on that first and then see what's left. And as one of the readings that was done here out of the 10th step was talking about the nature of the problem of alcoholism, when we work a spiritual program, we never figure out our alcoholism. I don't know if you've noticed that if you're new. We don't get an answer to what alcoholism is. Well, you see, the reason you're an alcoholic is your mother did this and your father did that. We don't have any of that. We never even hardly talk about the progressive nature of the illness. I mean, we mostly talk about sobriety and recovery and working the 12 steps. And what happens is when we stop focusing on the problem of alcoholism and work and go to meetings and have a sponsor and get involved in the program, all of a sudden we notice, exactly as the big book says, the problem has been removed. It just doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of gone. It doesn't come up on our computer list to worry us each day. The obsession with drinking just is over here somewhere. Now, if you may think that that's a permanent condition, but those of us that have wandered away from meetings for a while, sometimes on a business trip or something like that, I'll get away and sort of not go to meetings, leave the literature home, sort of I'll handle this alone. And I'll tell you, it doesn't take very many days of doing that when all of a sudden, boy, a drink would taste good. Starts coming back into the awareness part. And so that alcohol problem has been solved on a spiritual basis, which means, as the book says, that we have a daily reprieve contingent on our spiritual condition, which is what we work at a day at a time in here. And as long as we have that protection around us, the alcohol problem just doesn't come in to bother us. I never would have looked at life that way. So the education here in Alcoholics Anonymous has been the major education of my life, has been what I've learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was watching all the chapters of the big book being read, and I had just been doing some recent thinking about that book and reviewing some of the history about it. So if you don't mind, with Kevin's permission, I'll share some little thoughts on this, because I think the story behind some of the things that have happened in our fellowship is absolutely charming and priceless. And those of you that are new, if you haven't heard some of these, it's time that you did, because it's just such a wonderful thing. Alcoholics Anonymous could have fallen apart at 100 different times in its beginnings. It is, after you look at it a few times, you realize there must have been some higher power that just decided that this thing had to come together, and we're finally going to give the alcoholics of the world an avenue, a road to travel, so that they could finally get out of that hell known as alcoholism. And so we had our two people that were chosen, Bill and Dr. Bob, and I'm sure we all familiar with how they met each other in Akron, Ohio, and were the first two, and they started looking out for other people. And the story that I'd like to talk about starts after they've been sober about 3 years. And the personality of Bill Wilson is the one I identify with. Dr. Bob is the other kind of people that I just don't relate to at all. Dr. Bob knew when he was about 6 years old he wanted to be a doctor. You know, did you ever meet people who knew exactly what they wanted to be and where they wanted to go? My father still asks me what I'm going to be when I grow up. You know what I'm talking about? I still don't have any of those things. And Bill was much more the entrepreneur, coming up with one big idea after another. Let's get rich. Let's go here. Let's go there. And so he was always coming up with some new thing. And he was sitting down with Dr. Bob out in Akron, and they had counted up, and they had about 40 people sober in Alcoholics Anonymous after working this stuff for 3 years. And Bill's talking to Dr. Bob, and he says, you know, if at the rate we're going, it'll be about 50. We got to do something to stimulate this and to get it moving along. So let's have a meeting tonight. We'll talk about how we're going to get the AA message out to the people. And so they started thinking, and Bill started brainstorming, and boy, he came up with the surefire answer on how to spread the word of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said to Bob, now the first thing is that we got to have missionaries. We got the 40 people that are sober now, and these guys can't quit their jobs and start walking to assign one to each state and go out there. So it's clear right out of the chocks we're going to have some paid missionaries. That's the first thing we're going to have. Now the second thing is, you know, you're a doctor, you work in hospitals, and the hospitals can't stand drunks. They're puking all over the emergency room. They're throwing up on other patients. They're being obnoxious and swearing and everything. So the regular hospitals isn't going to work for us. So we got to have a chain of drunk tanks. We're going to have a chain of drunk tanks. And chains stores had just hit Wall Street, which is where Bill worked, and was a big deal. They had the first chain of dime stores and the first chain of department stores. And people who were behind the chains got very rich. And Bill, being an entrepreneur, sort of saw himself as the head of the chain of drunk tanks and figured that this would not only sober up the world, but would also put him back where he belonged, which was in the country club that he had been ejected from, and since he was so broke now. And the last thing they're going to need, since this was all being done word of mouth, was a big book, was some kind of set of instructions rather than relying on these missionaries to walk around and make up what the message was. And so Dr. Bob listened to this and, you know, was going, Bill, I don't know, they're paying volunteers and chain of I just don't know. Oh, yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. Don't worry about it. We'll take it over. So they went over to the group. And I don't know about you all. You've been in your home group for a while. Have you ever come up with a wild idea that you thought was great? You know what I mean? Like, hey, you know what we ought to do in the group, guys? We ought to join a softball league with all the other people in the thing. And then you look at the people in the room and they're all going, well, this is how you know that it probably wasn't a good idea. You know what I mean? That you get this feedback from the people. And so Bill went to the group in Akron that night and told them about this plan. Said, look, guys, we're not getting anywhere with this Alcoholics Anonymous. All these people out there, we're going to need this drunk tanks and the literature and so on down. And the room just stared at him. They just looked at him. Even though he was their co-founder, they just looked at him with that blank look like, hey, Bill, this isn't going. But he was able to stir him up by telling them there's 10 million people that are going to die out there if you just sit here and do nothing. We've got to start passing the hat. We've got to start raising some money. So they told him, Bill, you're big at raising money. Why don't you go back to New York, raise the money, and we'll get this thing started. Well, he took that as the okay to go do this, and went sailing back to New York with a mandate from Alcoholics Anonymous to start raising all this money to save all the alcoholics in the United States. And he went to all the big shots he knew around Wall Street, and every one of them just looked at him and went, wrong, no, not interested, sorry, we can't help you out. And he had a relative, his brother-in-law, who knew, or he heard him talk about one time, having a friend who knew John D. Rockefeller. And Bill said, God, I think I'll call up my brother-in-law and use the John D. Rockefeller connection. And maybe this will get Alcoholics Anonymous started. The guy's got, more money than anybody in the country. So he called his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law said, yeah, I think I do. I had a cousin who knew somebody in John D. Rockefeller's office. And lo and behold, when they made the call, this person in Rockefeller's office said, yes, would be glad to talk to you about this. So Bill, the promoter, is ecstatic. He's in the Rockefeller building. They're going up in the elevator to the 50th floor, and they're coming in, and the guy who's greeting them is Rockefeller's personal assistant. And he's just counting the money. Bill's just going, we're finally going to get this show on the road. And he goes in there, and this feller, Willard Richardson, said, well, that's a wonderful story. You've got 40 alcoholics sobered up. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're interested in. Let's have lunch. We'll talk over it some more. And as a matter of fact, I'm so excited, I'd like to get our board of directors to hear your story, Mr. Wilson. And so Bill said, boy, I better get Dr. Bob in here. So he called him in from Akron, and Dr. Silkworth from the place where Bill got sobered up. And they all met with this board of trustees, and they really liked the story, except for a couple of them. There were two of them on the board who said, well, let me ask a question, Mr. Wilson. So far, this has been a volunteer word-of-mouth effort. Wouldn't this paid people and chain of drunk tanks who put the money in there? Isn't that going to screw it all up? Well, now listen, we got 10 million people out there that are going to die. This was his guilt trip that he would lay on people that wanted to get in the way of his plans. And he'd say, we can't leave them die out there. We're going to have to do something. And they're going, I don't think it's a good idea. I really don't. But they sent a man out to check the Akron area over and give a report back to this group. And he did. He went out and met with Dr. Bob, went to AA meetings, saw the group, saw the people sober, and came back, gave his report. And the trustees voted that they should not recommend to Rockefeller to give any money to this. So Bill said, well, the hell with them. There was 2 or 3 of the trustees who disagreed, and they suggested that Bill form a foundation of his own. And then he could go out and solicit money, and they could give to the foundation tax-free, and that would give him the money to get the chain of drunk tanks going and pay the missionaries. So he formed the Alcoholic Foundation for the sole purpose of going out to solicit money. And he went around and was going nowhere. People were not interested in it, and he finally was granted an interview with Harper's Magazine, the religious editor. And in the conversation with the editor said, well, Mr. Wilson, do you have any literature about your organization? He said, well, I've written a sort of a chapter to a book. It's mostly my story. And the guy read it, and he said, well, now, if you had a book, I think it would be easy for us to publish some information about this book, and then people would be glad to donate money to Alcoholics Anonymous and get this thing started. So suddenly the big book became the center of the fundraising for our program. And Bill got going and wrote a couple of other chapters, and you got to realize everybody was extremely broke. I mean, most of the people didn't have jobs, and it was sort of hand to mouth, and so Bill, full-time trying to keep AA going, had to live off of the income of other people, and his wife is working and so on down. So there's a lot of urgency to getting this thing done. And so Bill's coming up with the idea of having the AA members donate to this thing to keep them going till they get the book going, and then they can start raising money from outside. And this is a true story. He's meeting with one of his entrepreneur friends, and he says, why don't we form a publishing company for this big book? And he said, we could sell stock subscriptions to the AA members, and then we'll get the money from that to get the darn book going so we can get the rest of this scheme underway. So they walked into a department store where they sell a pad of stock subscriptions. They didn't incorporate any company. They just brought these things, wrote on the top, Works Publishing Company, par value $25, and went to the AA meetings with these pads of stock certificates. And the members are sitting out there, and Bill gets up and he says, now, before we get the meeting going tonight, here's the deal. We got the stock subscriptions. And they're going, Bill, for Christ's sake, we're trying to stay sober out here. You're coming in here with the stock subscriptions and all this Works Publishing Company. Well, think of the 10 million people that are going to die out there if we don't get this thing underway. Now, God, so he's haranguing them. And people are standing up in the meeting going, what the hell do you want us to do? Buy stock subscriptions in a book you haven't written yet? I mean, give me a break. And so really all these things going on. But as time went on, he eventually got about $3,000 worth of stock subscriptions sold to AA members in the Works Publishing Company. And I'd love to have one of those as a collector's item. And he got a couple $1,000s from Dr. Silkworth, and it's sort of getting them going along, but he's talking now to a publishing company to get the book printed, and this is really going to be the main event. And he realizes he needs something to really get this thing moving. And somebody tells him about the Reader's Digest. They have a contact over there. So they make a trip over to the Reader's Digest office. They talk to an associate editor. They tell him their whole story, show him a couple chapters that he's got written to the big book. And the man says, well, how much longer will it take you to finish this book? And he said, oh, I don't know, another 4 or 5 months. Well, why don't you come back? When you've got the book finished, well, I'm very interested with the Reader's Digest. We'll publish a big story about Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll mention the book. And you'll be on your way. And Bill said, boy, this is something, because they had a circulation of about 12 million readers. If you get 12 million people reading about a book, you're going to get some sales. So he comes back and tells the AA people and other people that we got the Reader's Digest coming. He tells the publishing company who's going to print all these books, don't worry, the Reader's Digest is going to run this article as soon as the book comes out, so we're ready to go. So it's about a month before all the bills are due on the getting the book printed, and he says, well, we've got it pretty well in shape. Now, getting the book in shape, I just want to take a few minutes on that. What Bill would do is he would write a chapter, and then he'd bring it to the groups, and he'd pass it around. And everybody would look at it, and everybody had a different idea of what ought to go in that book. No, Bill, I think you're going too much this. It was driving him crazy, but he knew he had to keep it semi-democratic, or they'd get all over his case. We were beginning to have what we call the group conscience. And it was like most group consciences, it's a real pain in the butt, you know what I mean, when you're trying to get stuff done and you have to be democratic about it. And so he had circulated several chapters, and they had made minor changes, but the real test was now coming, that he had to write chapter 5. I mean, we were finally stop beating around the bush. We were going to get down, finally, for the missionaries, we were going to give them their chapter. And this was the chapter on how to get sober and what is the guidelines. How does this thing work? And so he got ready to write chapter 5, and he was feeling terrible. He talks about this really in a bad mood. And all of the people had been sort of weaned on the Oxford group, which preceded Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a spiritual movement in this country. It didn't have anything to do with alcoholics, but it had groups of people gathering together in order to become better citizens and more useful in their community. And they had 6 principles that they pretty well followed, from which our steps are pretty well taken. And they weren't having too much success with alcoholics. So as Bill was tinkering with the 6 principles, which is what the people were using to stay sober on, he started realizing that there were too many loopholes for the drunks in the 6 principles, and they could wiggle out of the program. And they were getting drunk by sneaking around these 6 principles. So he started a process lying in bed one night of closing the loopholes in these principles. And he was just fiddling around, and he said, well, I think I'll put this one in. This will get them too, you know. And then we'll get this one in here. And he just started messing around. And when he got through, he looked down, and he had come up with 12 of steps, or 12 individual components that we now know are 12 steps. And he liked the number, had a lot of good significance, had a lot of good historical meaning, 12. So he stuck with that. That's going to be real good. And it looked at it, he kind of liked it. He had actually moved God up to the front. God used to be at the very end. You didn't spring God on anybody till the very end, near the, you know what I mean? And Bill slid it up to the second step so that it was sort of up front. And he brings this stuff to the group, and it's almost like anarchy, a rebellion. People, what is this crap? What are you doing changing 6 to 12? Row. And when you got in the 7th step, humbly on your knees, ask God to remove our shortcoming. Get them off their knees. Stand them up. So he takes out their knees. What are you doing with God up in the front? We got to have God. We don't want God. Well, who is God? And then they started going, who is God? If a guy walks in the door, you tell him he has to believe in this person, right? In the second step, he's going to leave. We'll never even get to tell him about the illness and the surrendering and the inventory. What are you doing around? So then somebody said, well, maybe we'll have God as you understand him. And this came hammered out in this dynamics of the group process, and this is probably one of the most valuable changes that has ever been made in Alcoholics Anonymous, was this higher power as you understand him. And so through this terribly agonizing process, they agreed reluctantly to the 12 steps that, as Bill had now amended them 1,000,000 times due to the people in the group. So having done all this, they quickly went and got a bunch of the early people and put their stories together to go in the back of the big book. And those that couldn't write, they got people who were connected with newspapers to help them write their story and put it in the back. And they're getting this thing all assembled. And it's just about time now to go back to the Reader's Digest and give them the go-ahead. Tell them, yeah, hey, we're ready to roll. So Bill went back down with his promoter friend, a big Irishman, and went back, saw the same editor, said, look, we're back. I just want to let you know we're ready to roll. And the man said, roll what? Roll, you remember Alcoholics Anonymous, the book, the article, oh yes, Mr. Wilson, you were here about 4 months ago. And I thought you had the greatest idea in the world. I went into the senior editor, told him about it. He didn't like it at all, and I forgot to call you. We're not going to run the story at all. Sorry about that. Hope it didn't cause any problems. And, of course, boy, they're back. All the bills are coming due. The publishers are wanting money. The AA members are getting antsy. They're getting real nervous. They find out there's no Reader's Digest story. There won't be any sales. What are they going to do? Turns out that this newly sober Irishman, who had been helping him on this promotion, knew Gabriel Heater, who was a famous radio newscaster. And Gabriel Heater had a show every week, which was kind of a personal interest thing, where he talked about various human interest stories. And so this guy said, I could call Gabriel Heater and get an interview on his show, and then I could plug the book. And Bill said, now you remember, you got to plug the book. There's the main thing here is the book. And so he called Gabriel Heater and he said, yes, you can, I'll interview you on the show. Well, now Bill got real worried because this guy had only been sober 4, 5, 6 weeks, and he wasn't the best AA member, and he was real nervous that he wouldn't stay sober till the interview. So they got 2 AAs, they put him in a motel, and they guarded him around the clock for 10 days until his interview on the Gabriel Heater show. And he went there and was sober, got drunk later, but he was sober for this. And they came back and they told everybody, now see, we're on the radio, it's going to be wonderful. And that calmed all the bill collectors down, calmed the members down. And they got 5,000 books printed, and in their treasury they had $500 left. But absolutely broke at the end of $500, and they decided what they would do with the $500 now for the big promotion, for the big book, was to get a postcard shower of the doctors in the United States. Because they figured that the doctors are going to hear the Gabriel Heater show, they're going to want to treat the alcoholics, and they're going to want to know how to do it, and here will come a postcard that says, this new book is out, you can write in and get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, $5, and start treating alcoholics. And that was their last big coup de grace. So they sent the mailing out, and then the Gabriel Heater show came on, and they waited a week or two for the returns to come in. And they went down to, they just purposely waited an extra week or so beyond when they knew this great response was going to come in and give them all the money. And they went down to the post office box, drove down there, the two of them, they're all excited. Finally, it's payday. And they look in the little window, and it's like, they can see just like this many cards, just like 5 or 8 or something. And Bill's going, God, there's only 8 cards in there. The guy said, Bill, for Christ's sake, they can't put all that mail in that little box. There's bags full back there behind the thing. Get the guy over. We'll probably need help carrying the bags out with all the stuff that's in there. They called the guy out, and he said, no, there's no bags. This is it. This is your total response. And the total response was something like 12 postcards. 10 of them were from doctors so drunk they couldn't read their handwriting. They just, And there were 2 orders for the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they were in dire shape. They didn't know how they could last. There's a couple of stories about where they got some interim loans to carry them over. And shortly thereafter, he gets a phone call from John D. Rockefeller, who has been sort of ignoring this whole situation for over a year, 2 years, just sort of off in the background. Turns out John D. Rockefeller wants to have a big dinner in honor of Alcoholics Anonymous. Black tie, just like Kevin's dressed tonight in New York City. He was probably there, I don't know. And when John D. Rockefeller sends out an invitation back then in New York City to all of the big shot bankers, advertising executives, it's like a command performance. You must show up. And so these gentlemen, maybe 60 of them, came in black tie. The New York Times covered it. All the papers across the country covered it. John D. Rockefeller is throwing a black tie dinner for Alcoholics Anonymous. And they had an AA guy at just about every table. There'd be all the bankers and stuff. And the Irishman is back in action again. And he's at one of the tables. And there's a story that one of the bankers turned to him and said, well, Mr. Ryan, are you in banking? And he said, no, I just got out of the Graymore Sanitarium last week. And so this was an entirely new event for the upper class to be sitting at the table with these recovering alcoholics and to be have Alcoholics Anonymous just thrust on them by John D. Rockefeller. And it turned out that he was very ill, John D., and he sent his son Nelson Rockefeller to make the speech that night. And he came and told the story of Alcoholics Anonymous and how they had been watching it for a number of years and had come to the conclusion that money would ruin it, and therefore they were not going to give any large sums. They would maybe give $1,000 to help just get the book continuing and so on down, but they wanted to have each person there got a big book from John D. Rockefeller with a personal letter in each one of those big books telling them how important Alcoholics Anonymous was. And what really happened that night was he put his reputation on the line for something that was being ridiculed all across the country, namely the disease of alcoholism and drunks, and gave it respectability and gave it credibility, which in the long run turned out to be much more valuable than money, because it began the change in the public attitude when a leader like that is willing to put his own reputation on the line for a bunch of drunks, it must be something that we are going to have to change our minds or take a second look at. And that became an integral part of the story of the Big Book, was the non-participation on a financial basis by the Rockefellers, but the real participation in a spiritual sense by giving the credibility and endorsement to the efforts of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we all know the rest, that not too many years after that, maybe the following year, there came the great Saturday Evening Post story by Jack Alexander, who was a very skeptical reporter, heard about AA, knew there must be a gimmick, came down, went to meetings, hung out with drunks, and became absolutely sold on our organization, saw what wonderful work was going on, and wrote that kind of a thing, and that just started the letters and the people coming in and the geometric progression that has taken place has now brought all of us to the numbers that we're at today. And so when I heard everybody reading out of the book up here, it just made me think about how lucky we are that all of these pieces fit together, and that the people before us were so dedicated to keeping this message going and to keeping it in its purest form and to pass it on to the next person that's coming along. And when we look around what's going on here tonight, that this club, after 15 years, I would hate to add up the number of lives that have been changed by just the hands reaching out from that club. I know you all can, in your memories, those of you that have been around a while, can just look around this room and see healthy and happy people here tonight. But if you let your memory go back, those of you that are old-timers, look at that person across the table that's got about 3 years, and you can still see them when they walked in the door and remember what they looked like and what a mess it was and how hopeless and, oh, they were... And now you've been able, over these years, to share in their recovery, which is added to your lives. The wonderful thing about this message in Alcoholics Anonymous is how rewarding it is to have the good things happen to other people. I don't know about you all, but before I got to AA, I wasn't too interested in hearing good things happening to other people. I'd be down in the office and they'd go, come on everybody, come on in the room. Janie's going to get promoted and get a bonus. And I'd go, what the hell do I want to go in there? I'm not getting a bonus. She doesn't deserve it. I should have got it. She screwed me out of it. I mean, geez, let's be honest, huh? I did not share in the joy of others prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, being that extreme self-centered. And we come here, and tonight, being at this happy event, there's that, and particularly in this room, because this brings back memories from the Green Valley group when it got started, and the people got sober here and all the joyful memories. And so I think in closing, I would just like to say to those of you that are new, there's a couple things going on. You're going to be getting a lot of wonderful things. Coming to Alcoholics Anonymous is clearly going to be and is the single greatest thing that ever happened in your life. You may not appreciate that yet, but you will come to find out that that is the greatest gift that's ever been given to you. And it's going to be a lot of fun to get all the things you're going to get in AA. I mean, you're going to get peace of mind, you're going to get excitement, you're going to get self-confidence, you're going to love yourself, you're going to get comfortable with people around you, and it's going to be a wonderful journey. You're going to love it. But I'm going to tell you something you're going to love even more is giving that away. Once you got even the slightest handle on this, you're going to find out how exciting it is to find. If you've got 3 months to go find the person with 1 week and run over there and just tell them, hey man, I was just there a couple months ago. Let me tell you, this is it. And see, you are the one they're going to relate to the most. They got somebody over here with 15, 20 years. They're going, what, that old guy's probably going to die next week. What the hell does he remember about 1 month? But boy, when you come over with 3 months and you say, I was here in January, man. I just got out of the nut ward in January. Look at me, and I got a job, and I'm starting to come back. They're going to listen to you, and they're going to see that excitement, and they're going to see that glow in your eyes and the atmosphere that's in this room tonight. And that's what's going to keep them here. There isn't any words we can say. There isn't any magic things. It's a spiritual message, and the people feel it. It's real. It's not something that is taught in a college. It is here, and it is because we're all together. And I really believe that the higher power that gave us Alcoholics Anonymous is with us tonight. We're part of the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, just like some of the stories that we shared a little bit tonight. And clearly, the 15th anniversary of this club and all of the good work that it has done is going to be a wonderful little piece in the total history of this beautiful fellowship. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you so very much. And keeping in the spirit of the evening, I appreciate so much your sharing your knowledge and the bits of wisdom and the history of the big book. And let me close with the last two paragraphs of that book. It says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to us, to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order. But obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. And we have a wonderful way of closing. Will you join me? Ready? Just two more. Brownie, please.